Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations around the culture we create and the impact we can make. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson, and in this episode, we have a very special guest. It is my wife, Meredith Johnson. She is an amazing woman of God that hears from Him and walks faithfully every single day towards the calling that He has put on her life to impact those around her for Jesus. I'm so thankful that I get to walk with Meredith every single day and that I get to introduce you to her as we have a conversation around hearing the voice of God and the impact it can make, only in our own lives, but in the lives of the people that we work with and minister to. So I know you're going to enjoy this. So let's get to the conversation. All right, Meredith, you are one of my most anticipated guests on my podcast because you are the person that I love more than anyone else in this world. And so it's going to be fun to talk to you. So welcome to the podcast.
Except Jesus, right?
Well, yeah. So Meredith, welcome to the podcast. As I look over your life and I get to observe it firsthand and right next to you, I think a lot of the most significant things that have shaped your life and have led you down a path to share Jesus with others has been God speaking specifically to you or to people around you for you, and that's actually guided you on your journey. What are some of the most significant places and times that God has spoken to you in your life?
Yeah, it seems like it's happened in concentrated bursts at different periods of my life. When I was in college, God spoke a lot to me about cross-cultural mission. I was part of a program called the Josiah Project, run by a ministry called Rock the World, which I was on staff for later for a long time. And during that time, God really spoke to me about just a desire to go and communicate the gospel cross-culturally. I just enjoyed the challenge of communicating cross-culturally. We did some work in Mexico and then some work on a Native American reservation here in America. And one of my best friends at the time told me, when you talk about your cross-cultural work, I just see you light up and come alive. So that was God speaking through my experiences and also through my friend to say, hey, this is the direction to go. I did pursue mission work. I went to South America for a period of time. But then I also took a perspectives class when I was getting my master's degree. And during that time, I remember specifically a guy sharing about a movement that he helped to coach in South Asia. All Muslim peoples who just through the ministry and the revelation to one guy and his brother, this entire people group came to Christ. And, even today, tens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands are following Jesus in that people group in South Asia, in a country where probably most of us think there are hardly any Christians, but there are hundreds of thousands of followers of Jesus. But because they kind of do it undercover, it's on the down low. So it's not necessarily in your face. You might not be aware of it if you don't know this guy who's coached them. So this guy who coached them, like God really spoke to me through him, through hearing him speak at Perspectives, and his experience, just sort of the sense that there is more to missions than just some of the broken models of missions that we've seen over the years, the colonial, like we're coming to give you our outsider culture, which was really not the heart of God. And I saw through this guy's work in South Asia that there's a different way to approach missions. You can approach missions in a way that honors local culture and seeks to redeem it through Jesus and that it can multiply.
How do you do that? Your heart came alive in that place of hearing him, speak about this movement. How do you honor other cultures in the midst of missions?
I think, you come in and you just approach them as a learner. You approach from a humble standpoint. And, we talk, when we train our missionaries through all nations, we talk to them about how every culture has the demonic, the dirt, and the divine. We have to have some alliteration in there.
That's good alliteration. What does that
Thank you.
mean?
Yeah. So the demonic is in every culture, there's stuff that the enemy uses. There's evil stuff. Even our American culture, maybe
Really?
we might be inured to it because anesthetized to it, but we have plenty of evil in American culture. But
Yep.
then also there's a lot of neutral things in any culture. That's the dirt.
So you're not just talking about dirty things. You're talking about neutral things.
Right. The stuff that doesn't necessarily have an inherent spiritual meaning, or if it does have a spiritual meaning, that spiritual meaning can be reinterpreted. So for example, a woman covering her hair in a lot of cultures can be neutral. It can be either something negative. In some extremist Muslim cultures, it's used to oppress women, and that's negative. But in some more moderate Muslim cultures, it's used just as the fashion or to communicate modesty. And of course, even Christian cultures cover their hair. So covering your hair in and of itself is neutral. And then the divine is the places where like God has put these things into a culture and they reflect his heart. So hospitality is one example that you see in a lot of Muslim cultures. That's God's heart, to be hospitable. And I've never met more hospitable people than I have in the Muslim world. They're so kind. They'll open up their home to you. They'll feed you and feed you and feed you till you're about to pop. They'll let you sleep at their house. So that's part of God's heart. So I think a way that we communicate the gospel in a way that honors cultures is by coming in as a learner and looking for the divine in a culture first, rather than looking for the demonic first. We're, of course, always coming in prayerful, and we're aware that the enemy is at work, and we want to be in our prayer life. We're doing spiritual warfare against the demonic. But in your actual life, interacting with the people, you're seeking out where is God already at work, and where can we help them connect the dots between what's already there and Jesus, because Jesus wants to come in and inhabit that culture. The same guy who I was just talking about, who kind of fostered this movement or discipled the movement leaders in South Asia, he has a phrase that I stole this phrase from him, that he wants to see the heart of Christ in the skin of every culture. And so the idea is that we want Jesus to take on the skin of whatever culture he's entering into, which is kind of a weird thought to Western Christians until you consider the fact that we've already done it for our own culture.
Yeah, we have.
In America, we've put white skin generally on Jesus's heart. And we think that's normal. And we think that's who he was, but he was a Jewish Arab guy, and he looked different than us. But we've already kind of in culture, we've put our skin on his culture, but sometimes it kind of upsets us to think about putting other culture's skin on his heart. But I think that's what God is all about, because Jesus transcends culture.
He definitely does transcend culture, and I think that's a game changer. If God is already at work, we get to look at the places where he is moving, instead of saying it's up to us and all of our knowledge and all of our knowledge base to convert people so that then God can start to move. It's a totally different approach, but I think it's an approach that honors the culture that we're reaching, and it honors God, that he's powerful and we could trust him doing the work. One of my favorite verses is John 6:44, and Jesus saying to his disciples that nobody can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them. It's a big trust to say that, hey, God, will you draw people will you do the work and let me help and find those people that you are already drawing? So when you were contrasting missions in the past to that type of a work, what drew you to that?
I think just as I had kind of explored cross-cultural ministry earlier, I mentioned in college, part of what drew me to cross-cultural ministry was just discovering the different kinds of beauty in other cultures, and the idea that there's kind of the image of a diamond with different facets. And as I got to know Mexican people, as I got to know Native American people, I saw different aspects of the heart of God
Mm,
reflected in their culture. And then as I discovered through this teacher, the discipler of the South Asian movement, I am intentionally not mentioning any names for security, because in the work we do, we have to always be intentional about that. There are some people and also obviously spiritual forces in the world that don't like what's happening, that many hundreds of thousands of people from Muslim countries are coming to follow Jesus. They don't like that. So we have to be careful not to just throw names around. But as I discovered how he was doing it, I loved the fact that they were preserving the beautiful parts of that local culture. I don't think that we want every culture to start to look just like our Western American culture, and for it to be sort of a McDonald's, make everybody the same um, kind of assembly line. We want to celebrate the different aspects of different cultures as they come to their fullness in Jesus.
yeah, that's beautiful. And seeing that the heart of God can be evident within all cultures of the earth, and because God is a very diverse God, it's absolutely beautiful. When you were thinking about cross-cultural missions and wondering where in the world to go, how did God speak to you so that you could figure out, hey, which specific place or direction does God want me to go to?
Well, I started out just taking opportunities that came before me. So shortly after I heard about the South Asian movement at the Perspectives class, and that also opened my heart to unreached people groups. um, the fact that there are people groups in the world where there's hardly any Christians. So if the people wanted to know about Jesus, there would be almost no way for them to learn about Jesus, maybe through a Christian radio station or a Christian TV station, but they couldn't find like an actual human being who follows Jesus to disciple them. So as I became aware that unreached people groups existed, I had a burden that we needed people to go in and to reach the first believers and to raise those first believers up so that they could reach their own people group. I went to South America for a while because I had an invitation to work there, to work specifically training youth there. Had a great experience there, learned a lot. And then I was asking the Lord, where in the world should I go long term? I considered going back to South America long term. For me, with the people I had worked with there, I saw so many up and coming leaders that were really amazing people. I thought these guys have it under control. You know, they have enough
Yep.
of a leadership base that they can keep moving forward. They don't need me right now. But I know there are other parts of the world where they don't have followers of Jesus yet, much less growing leaders. Um, so I went actually to spend a season of prayer at the International House of Prayer in Kansas City. I'd been kind of captivated by their movement and their
Mm.
kind of ferocious dedication to 24/7 prayer. They literally have this one room here in Kansas City where people have been praying for like 20 something years, 22 years without stopping for
Wow.
24 hours a day. Um, so I spent some time there and learned from them a lot about prayer and how to pray more deeply and for longer periods of time. And I was asking every night in the prayer room. So I did an internship with them, which involves 6 hours a night in the prayer room. I decided to do their craziest internship because I kind of viewed them as a crazy ministry on the edge. I was like, if I'm going to do this crazy on the edge ministry, I'm going to do the craziest on the edge thing in it that I can do. So I did an internship called Fire in the Night.
Yeah, that's the theme of your life. Do crazy on the edge things, including marrying me, huh?
Yes, exactly. That's in my top 10. And anyways, would spend 6 hours a night in the prayer room from midnight to 6 a.m. And I decided at the beginning that I was going to, every night pray for different countries of the world. So they had a copy of Operation World in the prayer room, and I would pray for different countries of the world. And I just discovered as I prayed that Muslim countries were popping out at me, and that the Lord just kind of polarized my heart towards Muslims. So in prayer, I felt drawn to Muslims. Also during that summer, they had a ministry there where you could have someone pray over you and give you a word of encouragement or a prophetic word. They would basically listen to God for you and tell you what they heard. And so there was a man there who said, I see you leading a team of people into a dark city and helping the local people of the city to find the light switch and turn on the light switch. And that's the light of Jesus.
Wow, that sounds like what you were being spurred on to earlier when you're hearing the guy about the movement in South Asia.
Yeah, helping the local people do it. Yeah. And turning on the light within their culture rather than bringing something from the outside and putting it on top. He also said something about God showing me the next step at the midnight hour. And a few weeks later, on the 12th week of my internship, it was a 12-week internship. So 12th week, midnight hour, I had a meeting scheduled with Floyd McClung. I had kind of recruited him to speak at a missions conference I was leading for Rock the World. I was still working with Rock the World at the time.
Yeah, and Floyd is the founder of All Nations.
Yeah, Floyd founded All Nations. He was in YWAM for many years of his life, and he served in Afghanistan and in the red light district of Amsterdam. So really a kind of a missions giant, and actually a literal giant. He's 6'7". So I had a meeting with Floyd. It was supposed to be at 11 a.m., which was the middle of the night for me because I was on this flip-flop schedule for the Fire in the Night internship. But then he actually pushed it back to noon. And so it was the 12th week of my internship at noon, which was my midnight hour. I should have been asleep. And I went and spent some time with Floyd, and I said, where in the world should I go? You're a missions guy. Where do you think I should go? And he said, I think you should go to Yemen. And I was 27-year-old single woman. And I was like, that's crazy. I remember the only time I had ever heard of Yemen was on this episode of Friends. I remember Chandler was like being recruited or being sent by his job to Yemen. And it was like I had never heard of that country that had ever existed before. And of course, in the episode, they made lots of fun of it because it's like the most weird out there place you could go. So Floyd told me to go to Yemen. But his point was not so much, he wasn't really telling me to go to Yemen as the geographical location. He was telling me to be unafraid to go to the hardest places. And he said the hardest places are not really, the people aren't shut down to Jesus. The reason that they're unreached and they're hard places is because they're uncomfortable. And there are few missionaries who are willing to go because they don't want to go to distant, harder places that are not easy to live in. And so he's like, so we can change that. We can go to those difficult places.
He said the harvest is plentiful everywhere, right? We have to believe that.
Yeah. And then he also gave me a copy of Church Planting Movements by David Garrison. And that night I went to the prayer room and I read the whole book. And it was like, okay,
that had to have been the first pamphlet, not the whole book.
I think I read the 65-page version, not the 250-page version. And Yeah, it was like, okay, that was my midnight hour. Church planting
Wow.
movements basically was describing the same approach that my friend who worked in South Asia had taken
Yeah.
with his movement of going in, empowering local indigenous leaders to start small, simple churches that would multiply, bringing training to them in their context rather
Mm.
than pulling them out and sending them to seminary in some foreign city. And really empowering them as leaders really early on so that they can multiply easily. And so that they, as the movement gains steam, they take center stage, and
Yeah.
the outsider is always accessible and connected to them, but in the background,
Mm.
coaching them. And as I read that, I was like, this is how it can happen. It was like, up to now, I kind of thought that the movement in South Asia was an outlier, like,
Yeah.
you know, but now I realize that that was just one example of what God was starting to do all over the world. And I was like, this is how we can actually reach every tongue, tribe, and nation if we do it this way. Because the older model of coming in and bringing our Western outsider culture
Yeah.
and trying to just lay that on top of what people were already doing wasn't sustainable. It
Yeah. I
wasn't
remember
working, and it wasn't God's heart.
early on in my life, I was, I don't know, probably less than 10 years old, and we had a missionary couple come to our church, and they were from South America, and everything that they were talking about seemed to be Western culture coming in and trying to change the local culture. It didn't feel like Jesus to me. It didn't feel like the kingdom of God. And at that point, I said, I don't ever want to be a missionary. But, as God started to stir my heart for the nations and for Arab Muslims specifically, it was, again, I think the same book. It was Church Planting Movements. David Garrison said, hey, this is the way that we could do some things. This is something that really stirred my heart as well, to go in, let indigenous people rise up, local leaders rise up, and transform their culture from within instead of transforming culture from without. As you talked to Floyd, he told you to go to Yemen. He gave you church planting movements. What did that trajectory look like then? Saying, all right, I have this information. Now what do I do?
Um, I ended up going to the Middle East the following January and studying Arabic for almost 2 years. Because I thought, okay, if I'm going to head to the Middle East, whether it's Yemen or otherwise, I need some Arabic. And I also wanted to see what it was like to be in the Middle East. I remember going to the airport on that January day, and I think my mom was a little freaked out. My mentor had come with us, and he was like thinking that I might be a martyr. And turned out when I got there, I discovered the hospitality and the kindness and the openness of Arab culture, at least in Jordan. And so I just fell in love with the people and with that place, and um, ended up, I did visit Yemen, by the way. It's a really cool place
Mm,
in 2006. It's kind of a little bit like going back 25 years in time.
wow.
And their architecture is amazing. It's one of the more unique places in the world. Of
Mm,
course, I saw it before at the time when I saw it, it was not a war zone.
yeah.
It was still not a very super safe place, especially for Westerners, but it wasn't like it is today. Um, but I joined All Nations a few years later, and almost went to Yemen, but the opportunity to join a team there kind of went away before I was ready to launch. And so I spent some time here in Kansas City getting to know all nations, helping out with some training here, and waiting for God to call me somewhere. And in the middle of that, I met my husband. Have you met? You know about him?
Yeah, he's the best.
That's right.
Nobody better.
So we met in 2009 and married 10 years ago. And then we headed out the next year to Jordan.
Yeah. I remember that first time we met on eHarmony. And I remember the first time I saw your profile on eHarmony, I got matched with you. I was in the Shanghai airport in China when I first saw your profile. Well, I don't know if it's because I married you eventually that stuck out to me, or just your profile just really jumped out at me. I guess God was prompting me a little bit. And so as I saw your profile, I liked what I saw, and I wrote to you.
That's so nice. I'm glad you liked what you saw.
Of course I did. As I wrote to you and saying, what's going on? I was living in South Korea, so I was flying back to South Korea, and you wrote to me. The first thing you ever said to me was that you wanted to live and work in the Middle East, and if I didn't want to do that, then we didn't have to talk. It was something that was very jarring because I didn't have any other women talking to me like that. But it was another thing that was really honorable, respectable to say, hey, this is what God has put on my heart, and I want to follow Him. And it's not about my own desires to get married. Even though you had a desire to be married and you wanted a helpmate, you wanted somebody to go with you. It was about following God's call on your life. And there's really nothing more attractive than somebody saying yes to Jesus and putting one foot in front of the other and saying yes to Jesus and saying yes to Jesus, because that means you don't compromise on your values, on who you are. And that's a solid foundation. And because of that, I visited you, you fell in love with me because I am incredible.
So humble.
And so humble. You're right. But as we're navigating team together of being a couple, being married, and doing ministry together, how is that process for you actually doing work with your husband? I think since we've met, we've been co-leading and co-ministering together since we've met, and we're married. What does that look like on your end? How does that feel? What do you like about that? About being with me, working together?
Yeah, I think, it's been different in different seasons, but it's very helpful to have somebody I can lean on and to not have to be kind of a lone ranger. At the beginning, especially in regards to the area of Muslim ministry, you were kind of still learning things the first year or so, and some things that I had already learned because I had been pursuing it for a little bit, but you caught up really fast in that particular area. And then as we were in Jordan together leading a team, your giftedness in team dynamics and in training emerged. So we were able to have, a more well-rounded ministry because of that. We didn't only reach out to refugees and share Jesus with them and do disciple making with them, but we also ran our All Nations training there. So we were able to shepherd and bring alongside others who were drawn to Muslims and refugees, and we were able to teach and train them and bring them with us. We had a great team. And I think part of the reason we were able to lead team and to raise up so many people was because we had slightly different giftings, but we were able to walk it out together. Now, we share a job even at All Nations, which is kind of weird. We share the executive director job for All Nations Kansas City, but we just have divided up. We've divided up the responsibilities, and yeah, I think a job like this probably should be shared. It's a lot of hard work.
It is a lot of hard work. I love co-leadership, team leadership, something that's not a solo leader. I think that's healthier, and I think it reflects what the body of Christ is supposed to reflect as the embodiment of Jesus. Jesus was able to be the perfect person, and everything was able to be contained in him. But as he left, he gave us the Holy Spirit, empowered us to work and move. He dispersed gifts among us so that we have to work together. We actually can't do it alone. It's impossible. And so it's beautiful that we get to do it together. As your theme of God speaking to you and you moving, I think one of the things is we first started to visit Syrian refugees because we heard that Syrians were open and hungry to Jesus. We didn't see much fruit among middle-class Jordanian Muslims that we were first reaching out to. And so we started to say, hey, let's go and see about Syrian refugees. Tell us about that first refugee family that we visited and how the voice of God actually propelled us to even move to a place.
Yeah, we had been in Amman for about a year and a half. I was teaching English as a second language and studying Arabic, and Joshua was full-time studying Arabic. And we kept hearing rumors that Syrians were more open to Jesus. So we went up to a town near the border, and we visited a family, a woman with 5 kids, and she shared with us her story, which was pretty harrowing. And I think in response, we didn't really know. It's a little bit humbling to encounter that kind of a story of profound loss, because at least for us, we had very little, almost zero experience with war, and with that much loss. But I had been learning this Psalm 23 in Arabic. I shared that with her, and I shared the story of Jesus calming the storm in Arabic, and she was just drawn. She said, "Can you come back? I want to hear more about Jesus." So the next week we came back, and before tea was finished, she said, "I want to hear more Jesus stories. And also, I want to tell you about a dream I had this week." And in the dream, I was sitting in a circle of my family members, my extended family members. And when I looked across the circle, I realized the man directly across from me was Jesus. I've seen him on TVs. I know on the Christian TV station. I know what he looks like. He had brown hair and a beard and beautiful eyes. And he looked me in the eyes and he said, "I want what is rightfully mine." And she said, "What do you think that means?" So I was a little stunned, because this was the kind of thing that you read in missions books.
Yeah.
But it was real life, flesh and blood in front of me. Someone had had a dream of Jesus. And
amazing.
So I said, thankfully, the Lord had kind of set me up the week before. I was talking with some other workers about listening prayer and the idea that in prayer, you can ask God a question and then just listen. You don't have to talk the whole time.
Yeah.
And God can even speak to pre-believers. You don't have
God
to
could
be a
speak
believer.
to us? Wow.
Yeah. And not just us, but people who haven't decided to believe him yet. God can speak to whoever he wants to. So,
Go
So
God.
I know. So I said to her, can we ask God what Jesus meant when he said, I want what is rightfully mine?
Mm,
And she said, well, I've never done that before, but I'll try anything. So I told her to close her eyes so she wouldn't be distracted and just to be aware if a picture or words came to her mind. And I said, God, show her what Jesus meant when he said, I want what is rightfully mine. And about a minute later, she started to cry. And I was like, well, I guess something's going on. So I said, what are you hearing? And she said, he wants to refresh and renew my heart.
mm,
So that was Jesus's own interpretation of his own words, that not only was she rightfully his and her
yeah.
whole family, because he was in that circle of her family members, right? Her whole
Mm-hmm.
family, her whole tribe were rightfully his. He died on the cross, and it says in Revelation that by his blood he purchased people from every tongue, tribe, and nation. But the meaning of that wasn't just his ownership of them and his desire to get them back. The meaning was also that he wants to refresh and renew their hearts and give them
Mm.
new life and fill them with his love. So, yeah, after that happened, we're like, whoa, that was different than what we're used to. So we're like, let's move to that town where she lived
Yeah, but
and find
it
more
took
people
some
like her.
it took some prompting for us to move to that town. I remember that it is a dirty, dusty, not very pretty town. I mean, I grew up in the Northwest. I see a lot of mountains and trees, some beauty around me all the time. And to live on the edge of the desert is not an easy thing to do. It's a hard place to live, physically, spiritually. It was open, it was beautiful, but it took some prompting. And before I even met you in person, God gave me a vision, and that vision was a map of the world with red airplane lines that went from Seattle to Kansas City, and Kansas City to Amman, Jordan, and then Amman, Jordan up north a little bit. And that vision actually helped propel us north and be open to saying, "Okay, God, what do you have for us?" And we're willing to take that step and then next step. And we were encouraged by Floyd McClung and other workers to take that step and to walk in the things that God is calling us into. And I think it takes a lot of listening to God, being able to do what He says, but we also need some encouragement from other believers, and that helps a lot to help us move forward. One of the things that, as you share that story and you continue to share that story, to me, evangelism in that setting looks a little different than what most people typically think evangelism is. So, as you use story, a discovery method, how to discover God's truth, what does evangelism look like? In a way that honors other people and honors other cultures, but really points to Jesus.
I think the key is, know, there's a phrase I've heard before. You win them to what you win them with. So if you win them with a fancy, high production mega church seeker service,
Mm-hmm.
that's what they want, and you're going to
Yeah.
have to keep that up, right? So what we on the mission field, obviously we can't promise that kind of a thing
Right.
in a Muslim country. So you have to really think from the beginning what you're communicating, because that's what you're going to instill into them as they start to follow Jesus. And so what we want to communicate is not necessarily Western forms of church or even Western evangelism strategies, but we want to communicate Jesus and Scripture as the thing that's winning them, because that's who we can leave behind and what we can leave behind when we leave. So we would listen first to people and what they're going through. try to listen. What is the cry of their hearts? What is their felt need? And then to respond to that either by giving them an encounter with Jesus through prayer or through a Jesus story, either a biblical Jesus story or a personal Jesus story, a testimony from our own lives of where Jesus intervened and brought new life. So as you listen to where they are and start with where they are, rather than kind of coming in and assuming you know what their bad news is, you listen to find out what the bad news is, and then respond with an encounter with Jesus, either in real time or through a story. And that honors and respects where they're at rather than bringing something artificial from the outside. So with the woman I was just talking about, she was encountering loss. She was going through a storm in her life, and really a literal valley of the shadow of death. So Psalm 23, the valley of the shadow of death, and the story of Jesus calming the storm was good news to her. If somebody is sick or hurting, it's an opportunity to pray for healing, because that's the thing they need most. And that's the most honoring to them, to bring them to new life and new health. And Jesus can do it. So a lot of Westerners are afraid to pray for healing because they say, what if Jesus doesn't heal them? And I think a better question to ask is, what if he does heal them? Usually when we pray for people, if they weren't healed, they would understand and they would say, okay, we'll keep praying. And we would say, we'll keep praying. And sometimes they were healed later over a prolonged period of time. But we also saw people healed right in front of us. Yeah. And it was so life transforming. I'm glad we didn't miss that.
Yeah. And it's all about encountering Jesus, right? We want people to encounter Jesus. We don't want to just have people know about Jesus. And even in, discipleship of new believers as they come through, as I'm thinking about the story of Ahmed, as he started to believe, and, we were wrestling with baptism, and instead of having a intellectual debate on whether somebody should be baptized and the reasons why, what happened?
Well, we just gave Jesus an opportunity to speak to him, sort of like we did with, with the woman who had the dream. We said, let's pray and ask Jesus to show you in a dream or a vision what you should do, if you should get baptized and your family should get baptized. And he did. Jesus, so that a week later, he said, I had a vision this week. And Jesus came into my room and said, stand up and walk.
Wow.
So Jesus was inviting him to stand up and walk into this obedience of baptism. And he was baptized that day. So, we have to have a little more trust in Jesus. That's a lot more powerful than some white people who were our friends told us one time we should do this thing. Rather than that, how long is that going to last? But if Jesus appears to you and invites you into it, that's powerful and that's lifelong.
And as you share your story, as I live with you and I see you at work every day, the big thing, even in the hard places, the difficulties, we could go for hours on the difficulties of life with Jesus on the mission fields. But through all of that, you've put your trust in Jesus, and you trust him to speak to others. You trust him to move. You trust him to do things, and he does. And those are the most powerful encounters that people have, that we have seen. And the most powerful encounters that you have had in your life is the times and the places where Jesus encountered you and spoke to you. So thank you for sharing that and reminding us that, we need to trust him And we need to hear his voice, and we need to allow space and opportunity and room for people to discover who Jesus is on their own, and to hear the voice of God. So a couple of questions that I like to end in. For you, if you could give any advice to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give besides go find Joshua?
That's what I was thinking. I was like, go to the Seattle area and find your husband 10 years earlier.
I don't know. Man, I was a mess in my 20s, so we found each other at the right time.
Yeah, that's probably true. I'd probably tell myself to make the most of the time I had, and to enjoy the time I had as a single person. I think, unfortunately, I didn't enjoy my time as a single person and kind of the adventures I had doing missions, traveling the world. I didn't enjoy it as much as I could have because I was fairly worried about whether God would ever give me a husband, and didn't trust God to do that in the exact perfect timing. So, yeah, to kind of seize the time I have and trust God for the future.
Yeah, it's good. Have you been reading or watching anything that you would recommend?
Okay. I'll say we've started The Chosen season 2. It's just so fascinating how they develop characters. They've done a really fascinating development of the backstory of the Good Samaritan and the backstory of Nathaniel, which I know those are not strictly biblical, but they're definitely believable.
Yeah.
And it makes it come to life in a new way. And I also love the way Jesus is, portrayed. He's portrayed with kind of this playful teasing that he does with his disciples and others. He even does it with the Good Samaritan character. He kind of teases James and John when he calls them the sons of thunder, because they've kind of been so full of themselves and how important they were, right? And he's like, oh, sons of thunder, what am I going to do with you? And then they laugh along with him. So I love that it makes Jesus more real. Like, Jesus isn't just sort of either this lofty prophet or this kind of soft, wimpy comforter, but he's a real full personality with so many different aspects and angles. And the best relationships are the kind of relationships where that they're safe enough that they can tease you and you laugh along with them. Like they know the places where you've grown and where it's been hard, and they can tease you a little bit. And you're like, yeah, I know you're not doing that out of any kind of ill will, but because you really love me and you're the safest person. So I love that about Jesus in The Chosen.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Well, Meredith, thank you for doing this and sitting down with me and having a conversation. We don't often get to have conversations where we get to look back on what we've done. So this was fun. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.